Welcome to our leadership podcast. This is a new leadership podcast that myself and my good friend John Greenall, say hi John.
Hi guys.
Doing, and we're going to call it Leading at a Local Level. And John and I are both passionate about leadership. We've both led in local churches and charity organisations. And one of the things we're really passionate about is helping leaders at a local level lead well. And so we're going to be just looking at some different some different ideas about how we can lead well, and different subjects that we think are relevant, trying to take some of the big ideas and bring it down to a local level. So we're really excited about this, aren't we, John?
Yep.
We're excited about being able to just hopefully just share in like half an hour some really kind of deep wisdom that John has learned over many years, and I'm just doing my best still at leading. But we really hope this is helpful, and if you think it's helpful, we'd love you to share this with your friends, share this with your churches, and give us some feedback about other subjects we might want to tackle. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to explore some scenarios. So we're going to look at different scenarios that people hopefully are sending in, and problems that we've kind of come across where people have sort of opened up and shared with us about problems they're finding. And then we're going to kind of pick an issue out of that and then kind of explore that. And so the focus of today's podcast is really, we're calling it the freedom of no. And I don't know about you, but John and I have big problems where people are always asking us to do stuff, to do more stuff. Will you be involved with this? Will you do that? Can you help us do this? And one of the biggest problems you have in leadership is that sometimes you're just overwhelmed by the number of things that you have to do in a week or in a month, and you can almost lose the best for the sake of doing the good. And so we want to explore that subject today. And so I'm going to play the role today of kind of just sort of exploring the scenario, and John's going to be our expert answering that sort of question. So John's a master of saying no, aren't you, John?
I said yes to this, so we'll see.
Very good. So I've got a friend, and he is a guy called James, and he's a local church guy. And so he works with IT support. The names are made up, by the way. And he's one of our small group leaders at church. And he is required, because our church is quite active. He leads. He's really involved in leading a home group. He's really attending sort of our church meetings during the week. So that's generally at least 2 evenings a week. And then obviously, because he likes to do small group well, he's preparing for that. And so that takes up more time. He also helps out with sort of some community work. He likes to help out. He's very involved in the food bank, and so he helps out and volunteers on Saturdays with the food bank. And he's often involved with the church on a Sunday, particularly the kids' rota. I think, praise God to anyone that wants to be involved in kids ministry on a consistent basis. They're like gold dust. I've just been noticing really like how tired he is. He just looks tired. He just feels weak. You can just sense it, can't you? You meet people and they feel weary. He's actually, he was chatting to me, and he asked me about whether he should be involved with a local community association that had asked him to sort of be part of it and to be part of their board and to chair it. And it's a great opportunity for him. It's a great opportunity for that community organisation. It's a great opportunity for the gospel. And so, James has got an awful lot of stuff going on. He's busy in his job. He's busy with the church. He's busy with food bank. He's busy with other stuff. And so really, he is in a position where he is kind of asking, should I say yes or no to this situation? And so I think so often our leadership is defined by what we say no to, not just by what we say yes to. So, John, why is this subject of no so important?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, I mean, just to be really clear, I think the reason it's important for me is because from painful experience of and still learning now to say no. So I do not feel I come at this as an expert who's kind of, but I do come at it as somebody who's walked the path of painfully struggling to say no many times in my years of leadership, also just of normal everyday life. So I've felt the pain of when I haven't said no. And I certainly have seen it for others as well, both in leadership, accumulating more and more roles and things that you've said already, but also just for all of us. We may not be a leader in a local church, but all of us in our lives, great opportunities, great things that we're asked to do. It might be being on the PTA at school. It might be just doing an extra after school club. It might be looking after someone else's kids for a few hours, once a week. That just all that kind of thing. And so I'm kind of intrigued at this idea of, why is it sometimes so hard to say no? How do we do it well? And what are the consequences when we don't? So I think that's what I've kind of been thinking a bit about, really.
Yeah. So obviously this is one of our early podcasts, and we haven't done many. So it seems like a really negative subject to start with. Why must I say no? We want to encourage you as leaders just to say no to something.
Say no, yeah, no, totally. And I get that as well. I look at it, and that's why I think, we've titled this The Freedom of No, because I have found personally that being able to say no is incredibly liberating, like both for me personally, but actually for also the people who ask us stuff. And as you've already said, like when we come to leading, like leadership the mark of leadership isn't what you say yes to so much. It's actually what you say no to. And I've just seen in myself and so many other leaders that we can get hamstrung by an inability to say no. And so actually, I think that I'd even go as far as saying leading our own lives and leading others will be characterized by our ability to say no. I don't know if you've found that, Tim, or if it's just me who's found that.
Very good, very good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so often, the way I think about it is that you have a plate basically, and you can fit a certain amount of stuff onto that plate. And the trouble is that, in the end, if to put more on your plate, sooner or later, something has to kind of go off the edge of the plate. And the trouble is that what's going off the edge of the plate is so often, particularly if you're married, with kids or whatever, it's so often your family, your wife, your relationship with your wife, your time with your children. Maybe it's the pastoral care of the flock if you're leading at a local level. Sometimes the activities we do mean that, like I think about my own church, sometimes I think I really haven't spoken to that person for a number of weeks, and I really should. And so I think for me, it's a question of whatever I start that's new, I need to then ask the question, well, if I'm going to start this new, really, how am I what's going to go out the other end? Because something is going to go out the other end. And so it's a question of whether what is going to have to go out the other end is more important, less important than the thing that I'm now going to put onto my plate. So
I totally agree with you. And I love the plate analogy because it involves food, which is brilliant. The one that I usually go to, and I like yours actually, is the jar, and the idea of how am I going to fill the jar with these stones, on all these pebbles, let's call them, these big stones, and then the sand. And many of you would have seen this before. And how do you get most in? Well, rocks in first, then the pebbles, and then the sand. But I find myself, like in my own life and seeing others as well, sometimes seeing just everything overflowing or things falling off the plate. And I don't know if you hear times in ourselves or other people sort of feeling out of control of their lives, like feeling overwhelmed, and kind of people can start talking like victims and saying, this is happening to me, and life's so hard, and I'm so busy, and my schedule's so jammed. If you like what they're saying, is the food's coming off the plate, or the stones are overflowing out the jar. And sometimes
I've been really convicted, John, by the response that I give so often to people, which is, how are you doing? And I say, yeah, I'm good. I'm just really busy. And actually, like, that's almost like my default response to things. And I've been really challenged by that is not a good thing. Since when did being busy, like as almost like a negative, become somehow virtuous? Like the more busy I am, the more virtuous the more virtuous I am as a leader. If I'm really busy, then I must be doing something right. And I've been really challenged by that. It's not a healthy way to respond to people. It's not a healthy way to think.
And being honest with you, Tim, there are times when I hear that. Again, I certainly hear it in myself, but obviously, as we all do, sometimes we're more able to hear it in others. But when people speak like that, and I sometimes think, well, hang on a minute, like whose life are you living? What's controlling what you're doing? you actually in control, or is life just happening to you? And I think that's the case of, we can often project that, like things are happening to me, I'm out of control, I'm so busy. And when you break it down, there are all these activities which often are quite voluntary. They're things that you've said yes to, you could have said no to, but actually you've said yes. And so many people I speak to feel like this. And you put your finger on the, on one of those issues, is that actually it feels good. In our culture, like doing stuff is good. When you're active and your schedule's full, there's that sense of value. It's like, oh, I'm valued. When someone asks me to do something else, we kind of, sort of grow a little bit. We're like, oh, I've been asked to do something, I've been asked to be involved. People value me, people value kind of being productive. And I think actually that can feed an inability to say no. If you like, it's our pride. It's our pride in being seen to be busy, seen to be active and productive. I think that seems to be what you were saying. I'd agree.
Absolutely. So bringing it back to my friend James, like how would you? So if you were going to sort of help James work through that kind of process of thought, he's obviously got this opportunity to be involved with something really positive. How would you kind of help him, I guess, go through that process of thinking through? Because I think saying no isn't just a snap reaction, is it? And I think it's just the point of making so often our yes is a snap reactions, but we mustn't flip back the other way and just make no a snap reaction either, because sometimes actually we should say yes, shouldn't we? So,
yeah.
So you're talking to James now, how do you help him work through that job?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I'd probably divide it into like being prepared for stuff like that, but also then how we react in the moment. And obviously, James has just been asked, it's in a way a little bit late for him to be prepared in that way if he's already given an answer. But if he's got time, I'd say be prepared. And so I'd be saying, James, do you have a clear idea of what's important in your life? So when you're asked, to make a snap decision, when you're asked something, can you actually filter that? Do you have any way of filtering how important that is, or how big a sort of decision that is? So be clear on your priorities, James. If you think that, well, I don't know, if you kind of haven't thought through what's important, then everything can seem important. And often I might be saying, James, that you may not know what to say no to because actually you haven't thought about it before. So it's that kind of whole that rock and pebbles and sand kind of idea. It's just, I'd be walking through with James, what are the priorities in your life, and have you put those into your diary? And if you find that when you put all the rocks in your diary and you put all the pebbles in there, and you're thinking, well, okay, I've put in the key things in my life and there's just no space for anything else, then I'd say, well, the decision's obvious. The decision's made for you. It doesn't fit your priorities. Does that make sense? So that would be...
Absolutely. Do you do that, John? Is that something you do, like regularly sit down and just reevaluate what you've got on your plate and what's really important?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I think we all have different personalities, and some of us are real planners, and some of us haven't looked at a diary in years. But I would go as far as saying that I think if you're going to lead, you do have to have at least some measure of planning and looking and reflecting. And I have a rhythm of which I do that. So every week on a Sunday evening, I will look at my diary and I'll be thinking, have I kind of set this right? And I once a month I'll sort of look at things as well, and then twice a year I'll deliberately sit down and be praying through like what my priorities are. And so I'll put the big things. I've learned to put the rocks in first, and they may not be what you expect. So for me, it's time with my wife, it's time with my kids, it's time with God, and it's rest time. Because I know that, and particularly my rest time and time with God, if they don't happen, other things do not go well. Sleep time, making sure that I'm asleep. And I'm sleeping, for me, I know I need 7.5 hours at least a day. Those are my rocks. They're just very ordinary, practical things. But if those things aren't working, nothing else will. So I make sure those.
You and I have known each other for a while. I remember you giving a bit of a confession to me once that you kind of you pretended that you'd gone upstairs for sleep, but actually you'd sneakily gone away to do some work. I have the opposite problem. Sometimes I pretend that I'm working, but sneakily I'm just having a nap. But yeah, it's different people are different, and I think like yesterday, right? I had a day off yesterday, which was a Monday, because my weekend had just been absolutely rammed with message preparation and just trying to keep up. And I knew that I had to have a day off. I had to prioritize. I've got a busy week coming up, like a really, really hectic week ahead of me, but I really needed that day to get stuff done. But I was like, to be honest, I know the most important thing is rest, because I've realised that I have to say no to other things in order to say yes to rest. And I think you're absolutely right. And I'm with you. I try on a Sunday evening to sit down and look at my diary ahead of the week, and to work out what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. I even prioritise my tasks. Have you ever seen that quadrant, John? It's like urgent and important, but not urgent, not urgent but not important, and not urgent, not important. And I don't have lots of tasks that, like, I've now just put all my tasks in one of those 4 categories all the time. And so I'm always then trying to work out, like, how important is this? Really, do I do? I mean, that's related to tasks rather than James's idea of activity, of a commitment. But for me, I've realised that the best leaders know what they should be doing, and they don't get sucked into doing what they shouldn't be doing. And
the phrase you use there is spot on. But when you say yes to something, it means saying no to something else. And I've found that hugely clarifying, because it means that if I take on something else in my schedule, I'm not sitting around waiting to do more stuff, to be honest. I'm trying to chop out stuff in my schedule at the moment. So if I take something else on, it means saying no to something else. And for me, and we're all different, but for me, what goes is my rest time, because I'll just keep on working. What I start to wake up later, I don't spend time with God. Those are the things that go, and then my time with my family, and then the quality of my work sort of suffers. So I don't do things as well. I'm not as prepared. I'm not as present. And for me, that leads down a path of, personally, it's led down a path of burnout and stress. And again, different for everybody, but we know ourselves, and I think if we're asking those questions of ourselves, we know where it can lead us when we're not able to say no to things.
Can I just pick up on something you said there, which I think is very interesting? I think that when you think about leading at a local level, right, for leaders that are kind of leading churches or leading medium organisations, probably what suffers is not the organisation in the short term. What suffers is your ability, I think, to be present. And I've been thinking about my being present. So I can be there with my children, and I can be there with my wife, and I can be there with the church, but am I really present? Am I really there? And I think that's so often, if I'm going to say to James, when thinking about what he's thinking about taking on, it's great you're involved in the food bank, but if you're turning up and you're exhausted and you're mentally not really there, you're there in body, that's great in one way, but in another way, like, actually, you need to be present. If we're gathering to worship as a church, as a leader, I want my guys to be present. I don't just want to be standing in the meeting kind of like, you want to be engaged and really and worshiping God, and you can't be present if you're saying yes to everything. You're so exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, you do, Zoom gives you all those excuses. So right now, I'm thinking, while we're chatting, should I can't while we're chatting, but if I was sitting listening to a meeting, I'd be so tempted I could send another email, and basically I end up just not doing anything well, not, as you say, not being present. And it just has had a huge impact on my life when I haven't done that, as well as the week to week stuff, Tim. I actually also think the big picture. So my wife and I do something called revisioning, where once a year we'll kind of say, well, what's the big picture? What is it that God's calling us to? What are the big themes? So I sense that this year I've kind of committed to preaching a certain number of times. I've committed to doing certain things in the church, and I kind of put my life under sort of big group headings. Sort of my church and my work and my medical work and so on. And that's so clarifying when I look and say, look, in this season, I think I should be committing in this direction. This is where I sense God's leading. So I'm going to say yes to that. But it means that for this season, I may need to say no. And sometimes people think, oh, if I say no to something, that's it forever. But I tend to look at it in terms of, actually in this season of my life, this is something that I know I need to be saying no to. But actually, maybe I'll be able to say yes to it, into the future. And I find that very helpful.
To give to James, isn't it? Thinking season. Thinking like, I think that's actually very helpful. That's a really, really good point, John. I think I agree. I think you have to think in seasons. This is what I can do for this season. And it's drawing a line under something and saying that season's now come to an end, and then moving to the new season. Right? It's great. So you're telling James to prioritize. You're saying, like, sit down, work out the priorities. What else would you say to James?
Yeah, and I think that's that's obviously, it goes without saying, I want to say to pray about it. But I do think we can be quite quick to say to people, go and pray about it. And I'm all for praying about it. I do believe that God can come in and can speak to us. But there are times when we think, I'm not actually sure what God's saying. These are all good options. And so that's why we're kind of looking at some more of the practical wisdom here, because oftentimes God does give us one another, and he gives us our brains to say, well, actually, what is it that we're doing with? So I think, yeah, there's that. I think then also what expectations do others have of James? So actually, what expectations does he allow to exist in other people? If you're the person who always says yes, then people just expect, oh, okay, I'll ask James because he's going to say yes and get the job done. So sometimes we need to kind of train people's expectations. And if we've got used to saying yes to everything, or if we've got used to doing everything on a Sunday morning, to make Sundays work, people get used to that. And so actually helping to retrain people's expectations, and helping, people as well to, for James, he might need to say, look, I can't do that. And I know that my wife she finds it really difficult when she says, I can't do that, to not then say why she can't do it. Whereas for me, for example, if I know that I've got date night in place and someone says, look, I really need you at this meeting, then I'm very happy to say, I'm sorry, I've got something booked in the diary, I can't make it. Okay, and I don't feel any need to say, why, because it's one of my rocks, and someone else may not understand that, but I know for me that's important. That's my evening off. I've got something in the diary, I can't make it. And I just find that really helpful. So I'd be saying to James, you have ways of retraining people's expectations, ways of protecting yourself where you can say, I can't do that, I'm afraid. I found that really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all gone to people in leadership and we've asked them to do something, the yes people, and then they've said no to us. We're like, what? Sorry. Yeah. You meant to say yes to everything. You're my go-to guy. And I think some people actually craft identity. I wonder if this, like James has crafted identity out of being a go-to guy. I'm your man. If you need something done, come to me, and that's great. And that's fine if if you've got the capacity. But sooner or later, as a leader, you can't always do that. It doesn't work. Sooner or later, something has to give. And I think, as you say, learning to manage other people's expectations is important. Very important. And I love what you said about just not having to give an explanation. I've realized that sometimes less is more, and just be like, oh, I'm really sorry, I just can't do it, I just haven't got the capacity at this time to take that on, or I'm really sorry, but I've actually, as you say, I've got something else booked in. Sometimes what I've got booked in is an evening in front of the telly. But that's that I know that I need that. I can't do 5 meetings in 5 days in an evening. I have to say this evening I'm going to sit down and watch telly with the kids. And I think actually just not feeling like you need to explain that is very important. And equally, as leaders, when someone says to us, I'm really sorry, I can't do that, having the respect to be like, oh, okay, all right, fine. And I think that's, I think that's so important. I think it's very powerful in terms of understanding that, managing people's expectations. Do you not think that links though to this whole issue that I wonder how much of James's value as a person, and I think it's me as a leader, how much of my value comes from being wanted and needed? Yeah.
Well, for me, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not sure about others. I suspect it is something that's quite common, certainly in our culture. But yeah, very much for me, that's been my value has been in so often what I've done, what I've delivered by being able to say yes, by trying to please other people. It's wonderful when you can say yes and they're happy. You can then deliver and you feel good about yourself. It hits so many buttons of where my security is and where my comfort comes from, where my true identity lies, and that's the nitty gritty of this stuff. It really is about where our idols are, where my idols are. And that's why I think there is such freedom in being able to say no. And I find it really hard, there's no doubt about it, it's really hard to turn around and say no. I kind of think, oh, have I missed an opportunity, have I let them down, have I missed God's will for my life? But overall, I've just found it to be incredibly liberating. And yeah, it's been just huge for me in my walk with God.
I think one thing I found really helpful, if I was to say to James, I think it is to think around what are your emotions that are driving are driving this underneath. I think that's where, to me, I take my emotions. When I say let's pray about it, what I do is I pray through my emotions, because there are sort of often there are very positive emotions. So, for example, like, oh, you know, this person, I'm going to be valued, or you know, this position is going to give me some, you know, let's just be truthful. It's going to make people notice me more. It's going to build my reputation. So I will often pray through that and be like, Lord, when I need to strip that all away and say, what am I doing? And equally, sometimes when I'm asked to do something that I don't want to do, I mean, that's the flip side of it, saying yes. There are times I should praise my emotions. My natural reaction is to say no, because I don't want to do this, because it isn't particularly going to, you know, the flip side, it's not going to enhance my reputation. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a commitment. It's going to be, you know, effort, all those kind of things. And I think praying through your emotions, when you say let's pray through it, for me is very important, because it's bringing that, your sense of pride, I guess, before God, and saying, God, I'm laying down my pride. My job is to do your will in this moment. So John, let me say, so let me ask you a question. So if you're James in this moment, you know, and you're looking at what he's got on, what would you tell him to do? How would you actually practically, what would you say to him? What's the answer, John?
Well, I mean, why don't we just let's just walk for this, okay? So I'll be James, and you just asked me to do something. Let's say you're asking me to be involved in this community association. You've just given me this amazing pitch for what they're doing. You've given me the vision. You've told me how incredible it is. You've told me how my...
Would have been good if I'd done it. Would have been good.
Yeah, I know, but we haven't got time, so I just imagine it's been done, right? So then I'm James. I'm responding. Okay, so here's how I might respond, just as an example. So I might say, you know what, Tim, thanks so much for asking me. I love your vision for this community association. You know, I love your vision for the neighbourhood, and thanks for articulating it so well. And thanks for asking me. Like, I feel really honoured that you've asked me, and I suppose that you feel I've got something to offer. I wonder if it's okay if I just need a little bit of time to think about it. So I may just take a couple of days just to think it through. I need to look at my diary. I need to speak to my wife because things are quite full at the moment. So I'll get back to you. So how about I'll get back to you by the end of the week? Would that be all right? So you say yes. That's the right answer. And then,
of course, yes, absolutely.
And also, while I'm thinking about it, Tim, you know, there is, you know, there's a lady who I know really well who's also really passionate. She's been talking a long time about doing community stuff. I just wonder whether, you know, she might be someone to speak to as well, because she might be a huge help in what you're looking to do. So perhaps I'll just ask her if I can share her details with you so you can get in touch with her, and that might be a helpful introduction as well.
Oh, yeah. That's
so end of scenario. But what I'm trying to say is that when we're kind of in the moment, we want to be proactive and not reactive. And that's what, you know, no reactive no's, no reactive yeses. We can always feel that pressure, I have to say it, but it's okay to say, first of all, thank you. Like, really important to affirm people and why they're asking you. It's okay to then defer, to say, you know what, I'm just going to wait a bit. I'm just going to pause and just assess, as you say, pray things through, look at my motives, look at my big picture, and then possibly also redirect them. So I'd started to do that already. But sometimes it's okay. In a leadership role, you're often aware of people who have got skills and gifts and talents, and people might come to you and ask you to do stuff because you're the one up the front, or people think you do loads of stuff. But it's actually okay sometimes to say, you know, I know someone else who might be able to help you. And it might actually be that they're better placed than I am to help in the community association. And so actually as a leader, I've got this privilege of being able to point them to someone else and to help someone else flourish in what God's called them to do. So that's some thoughts.
Yeah, so what you're doing is, again, I love that idea of being positive. So actually reaffirming someone, so you're not, you know, sort of saying, well, yeah, I love what you're doing, I love what you're all about. You know, so if someone comes to me in church personally and asks me to, you know, visit a home group, for example, and I know that I've got 7 other things this week, I say, I love the home group, I love what you're doing, I love being, you know, the way you're leading it, and so you're framing it in a positive context. And then obviously what you're doing is you're then allowing yourself space, and I think that's so important. I think so often people don't give themselves enough time and space, and I think that's very, very wise advice, really. If you're feeling pressure to say yes to something, taking a step back and giving yourself time is so important. And let's be honest, I mean, I know we've talked about James's scenario where he's been asked to take on a big responsibility. Well, that seems to be a bit more legitimate to take some time to think about it.
Yeah.
That's almost expected that you would take time. I think often the pressure for leaders is when we're asked to say yes to something in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, would you be available to come and speak at the ladies group, you know, on next Thursday? Or, you know, I had a situation, to be honest, really recently where I ended up having to speak, you know, quite a lot in a very short space of time. And I probably should have taken more time just to say, do you know what, I really thought about it and actually said, to be honest, no, because it did add a lot of pressure. It worked out okay, but it just added a lot of pressure into my schedule. So I think that's great. You know, being positive, taking some time is just such an important piece of advice.
And being able to say, it's helpful for me to say, to take that time, but it's also serving the other person, because if we've been on the other end of that, when someone says yes and then doesn't actually follow through with what they've said, it's incredibly frustrating. And so I think, you know, but by taking that little bit of extra time, now the onus is on us then to actually get back to them. So sometimes we hear someone say, "Oh, think about it," you know, or we say, "Well, think about it," and we end up procrastinating, or we don't give people answers. So we need to honor people by getting back to them. But that's a sense of discipline of saying, but it does impact things. It's far better to take a little bit of a hit now, a little bit, almost feel like a bit of loss of face. You know, you're not pleasing somebody straight away, but it's so much better for them as well to actually consider it. And then, as the Bible tells us, let your yes be your yes and let your no be your no.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest problems I have in church leadership, and I guess you experience it in, you know, so obviously your role in CMF, Christian Medical Fellowship, you know, and running lots of voluntary groups and things like that as well. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than someone starting. You know, you invest in them, you get them going, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 months down the line, you know, but they just sort of say, it's too much now, I can't carry on. And you're like, God, you've just got going, you've just got started, you're 3 months or 4 months in and you're bailing out. Like, that's really frustrating. Do you know what I mean? It's like, obviously, you know, if there's a major life circumstance that happens, then of course we understand that you can't do that. But if there's no other reason than the fact you didn't think about this 2 or 3 months ago, then that's just you've made everyone have to work harder. I've now got to go and ask someone else. I, as a leader, now got to deal with the disappointment that you've let me down and the frustration you've let me down. You feel guilty because you're letting me down. Whereas if you just had the courage to say no at the beginning, all of this could have been avoided. It's a bit like pulling the plaster off, isn't it? You know, or John, you're a doctor. It's a bit like going to the doctor when it first starts to hurt, rather than waiting until the whole leg is infected or something, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what I love pushing people, and I say this often to people. We have loads of volunteers. I'm trying to lead these volunteer, you know, organisation groups in our network, and I always try and push people to the no. I try and get to the no, and that's so key. And if people keep saying yes, I will tell them that I'm worried, and I say I'll keep asking you then, because I'm quite demanding. I will ask lots of people, but I also say to people. I said this the other day to one of our volunteers. I said, I want to put you off. You know, I'm deliberately going to do my best. I've got a big volunteer position I want to fill at the moment. Just had someone I spoke to. I'm desperate for them to take it on. Like, I'm desperate. I've been praying for it for 2 years. And I said to him, I'm going to do my best to put you off, because you know what? I don't want him to say yes, and then to get, you know, a month down the line and find that his life's going wrong and that it's wasted a huge amount of time, you know, on my part and on the organization's part. I'd rather he said no than said yes. So I always say to people, I'll try and put you off. And there's one of my volunteers, I had this big chat with her and she seemed to really be getting it. And then I had actually a project, it's to do with some of our speaker stuff. And I went to her, and you know what, she turned around and she WhatsApped me back and said, you know what, I've just looked at what I'm doing and I can't do it. I've taken your advice. I was gutted and delighted at the same time. But as a leader, my priority is to look after my volunteers. So in church, that's to look after my people. It's not to use people to get the mission done. My mission is actually to help people and to see God work through them. And if they're in a good place, if you know, if they're in the right place, you know, and if you like, on the right seat, on the right bus, then things are good and things tend to happen. That's my priority. It's not to try and desperately get things done and to kind of use people to fulfill the mission. That's not how it works. And I've learned the hard way. But there's such freedom in helping people to say no to me as well.
Absolutely, brilliant. Well, I think we should call it day there, John. I think we've rounded that subject out. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask us, leadership questions you'd like us to explore together, then please do just let us know. This is going to go up under the MLG, the Mission Life Grace banner. So it's going to go on our YouTube channel. You can find us on Instagram and on Facebook. And there's some details about how you can get in touch with us there. But yeah, hopefully it's been helpful, John. I think it's been a really useful conversation and very powerful. And so we just want to really encourage anyone that's kind of listening to this, really go before God. Don't be pushed into doing things just because it seems like a good idea, or it might be fun, or you might get praise for it. Really go to God and have the courage to say no, because actually it might be saving yourself a lot of pain later down the line. So goodbye from me, and we'll see you hopefully next time.
See you. Bye.